Then he took out another loan for $65,000.
When Paul stepped into his grandparents' farmhouse to start the daunting task of renovating, he never expected to uncover a hidden treasure beneath the floorboards. The house, which had stood silent for years, held more than just the weight of its age. It hid a secret that would stun historians and change the way Paul saw his family forever. What he uncovered wasn't just a collection of forgotten items. It was a key to unlocking a hidden chapter of history, and the world would never look at his grandparents the same way again. A relic of the past. When Paul decided to take on the renovation of his grandparents' farmhouse, he never expected that the dusty, worn-down house would reveal its secrets. The once vibrant home, filled with echoes of laughter and memories, had fallen into neglect after his grandfather and grandmother had passed away. It was now a relic of the past, slowly decaying, a ghostly reminder of the time before. Standing in front of the old farmhouse, Paul felt a mix of frustration and nostalgia. The roof had caved in, the windows were shattered, and the floorboards creaked with every step. The house, once full of life, now stood as an abandoned structure, slowly crumbling under the weight of time. But what lay beneath the floors, hidden from view for decades, was about to change everything Paul thought he knew about his family's history. The smell of rotting wood filled the air as Paul pushed open the creaky front door. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing the disheveled state of the interior. Dust motes danced in the rays of sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. This wasn't just a house in need of repair. It was a time capsule, a place that held forgotten memories and untold stories. The old family home had become a symbol of everything his grandfather had cherished. Yet, Paul was about to discover that this farmhouse held more than just memories. It was about to reveal a secret that would change the course of history. The first step toward discovery. It was just another day of cleaning and clearing out the old farmhouse when Paul made his first unexpected discovery. With his gloves on and a determined look on his face, he began tackling the stubborn floorboards. The floor had long been neglected, warped by years of neglect. But Paul thought it was the first step toward restoring the house to its former glory. What he didn't know was that beneath that weathered floor, a hidden history was waiting to be uncovered. As Paul pried up the first board, he noticed something strange. A small metal handle poked out from under a patch of carpet. At first, he thought it was just an old pipe or some piece of hardware that had been left behind. But the more he examined it, the more intrigued he became. This handle wasn't part of the regular flooring. It was deliberate, hidden beneath the surface. Why would someone conceal such a thing under a rug? Paul couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. With the curiosity of a man who had inherited the weight of family responsibility, Paul felt an urgent need to uncover the truth. The metal handle wouldn't budge, no matter how hard he pulled, but his instincts told him to keep trying. It wasn't just a relic of old wood or forgotten things. This handle had a purpose, a reason for being concealed beneath the floor. Little did he know, that very night, a locksmith named Kingsley would help him reveal something far more significant than he could have imagined. Kingsley's arrival. After a few frustrating hours of trying to pry the handle loose, Paul turned to Kingsley, a local locksmith who had recently helped him with the front door. Kingsley was an expert at handling tricky situations like this, and when Paul explained his discovery, Kingsley was immediately intrigued. What was hidden beneath that floor? The answer lay just beneath the surface, but the task of uncovering it wouldn't be as simple as lifting a handle. Kingsley arrived within the hour, bringing his tools and expertise. As soon as he saw the metal handle, his curiosity piqued. This wasn't some random scrap of metal. It was a professional-grade floor safe, most likely installed during the 1930s or 1940s. These safes were built into the foundation of the house, providing maximum security for valuables that needed to be kept hidden. The presence of such a safe beneath a farmhouse, in the middle of nowhere, raised 1,000 questions in Paul's mind. The air was thick with tension as Kingsley worked meticulously, trying different methods to unlock the old, rusted safe. Time passed slowly, and the sounds of metal scraping and tools clanging echoed throughout the farmhouse. Every movement Kingsley made seemed like a crucial step toward unveiling a long-forgotten piece of history. Paul could barely keep still. he couldn't help but wonder what could possibly be hidden inside. Was it treasure? Family heirlooms? Or something even more significant? At long last, after what felt like hours of work, the safe's lock gave way with a resounding click. Paul's heart raced as he grabbed the handle, feeling the weight of the moment. As the metal door creaked open, a dim beam of light from the flashlight revealed standing water at the bottom of the safe. Paul's excitement quickly shifted to concern. Water damage. His heart sank as he realized that whatever treasures had once been stored here might have been destroyed by flooding. But despite the water, Paul couldn't stop himself from digging deeper. Hidden trove. As Paul carefully removed the bricks that had been arranged to protect whatever lay below, he felt the weight of history pressing on him. The water had caused significant damage, but as he cleared away the debris, he began to uncover something extraordinary, something that had been preserved against all odds. The first item he pulled from the safe was a coin collection book from 1937. While the cover was damaged by the water, the contents of the book were still in remarkable condition. Each coin was carefully wrapped in protective materials, showing an unexpected foresight from his grandfather. The coin collection was just the beginning. Paul found more books, each one filled with meticulously organized coins from different periods in American history. Indian head pennies, Mercury dimes, and rare coins that Paul had only seen in collector's guides. It seemed that his grandfather's interest in numismatics went much deeper than he had ever imagined. Paul marveled at the collection, but it was the water-damaged bills that piqued his curiosity next. Wrapped in waxed paper and arranged by year and denomination, Paul found dollar bills that had been carefully preserved. Some bills showed signs of wear, but the collection was astonishing. What was even more remarkable was how these bills had been organized. Some were selected for their unique serial numbers or printing oddities, signs of careful attention and thought. The question loomed in Paul's mind: what was his grandfather preparing for? And why had he kept such meticulous records of his collections? Silver bars and jewelry. As Paul continued to examine the contents of the safe, he was astounded by the discovery of silver bars, gleaming in the flashlight's beam as though they had been polished only yesterday. These bars were not just ordinary metal. They were carefully preserved, each one marked with detailed engravings that indicated their origin and purity. Paul had never known his grandparents to collect precious metals, and yet here they were, hidden in plain sight. The discovery of the silver bars was followed by an unexpected trove of jewelry and pocket watches. Some pieces showed damage from moisture, but others remained surprisingly intact. There were rings, necklaces, and watches, possibly family heirlooms or valuable items acquired over the years. What Paul didn't know at the time was that these items were not just family treasures. They held a deeper connection to his family's history and to the broader American narrative. Each item told a story. The jewelry represented more than just wealth. They were symbols of his family's legacy. As Paul sifted through the items, he was struck by the thoughtfulness and care that had gone into preserving them. These weren't just things. They were pieces of a history that had been carefully safeguarded by his grandparents, waiting for the right moment to reveal their significance. The grandfather's hidden currency collection. But the true discovery was yet to come. Hidden among the jewelry and silver bars, Paul uncovered a stack of banknotes bearing the signature of Joseph W. Barr, the Secretary of the Treasury, for just 29 days in 1847-1968. Paul didn't know the significance of these notes at first, but as he started researching, he realized he had stumbled upon a piece of American financial history. The notes Paul had discovered were some of the rarest forms of currency in existence. Joseph W. Barr's signature was a rarity, and the bills themselves were part of a unique moment in U.S. Treasury history. During Barr's brief tenure, less than 1% of all bills printed bore his signature. The discovery of a collection this size, preserved in near-perfect condition, was unheard of. Experts were astounded when Paul shared photographs of the bills. These weren't just ordinary dollar bills. They were a snapshot of a moment in time, carefully preserved for future generations. The value of these bills, depending on their condition, could range from hundreds to thousands of dollars each. But beyond their monetary value, these notes told a much richer story about the history of American currency and the foresight of Paul's grandfather. a history revealed through coins and currency. Paul had long known his grandfather was an avid collector, but this discovery revealed the depth of his interests and the meticulous care with which he approached preserving pieces of history. Each coin, each bill, each note had a story behind it. As he pored over his grandfather's carefully documented records, Paul realized that the collection was far more than a hobby. It was an investment in preserving a record of the past. Many of the coins in the collection were rare, produced during years when the U.S. Mint had produced limited quantities due to economic factors or printing mistakes. Some of these were virtually irreplaceable, like the famous 1955 double die penny, a coin that was only produced in small quantities and is now considered one of the most sought after among collectors. As Paul carefully examined each coin, he was reminded of the lessons his grandfather had taught him when he was a child: how to respect and preserve history. While many of the coins were common, others told a different story. Coins from the early 1900s, silver dollars from the 1800s, even foreign coins from across the world. It was a diverse collection that spanned generations, capturing both the mundane and the extraordinary. His grandfather had been a careful collector, not just gathering what was popular, but also searching for pieces that captured a moment in American history. Paul couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of the find. Each piece wasn't just valuable, it was part of a larger narrative. His grandfather hadn't just been collecting. He had been telling a story, preserving the past for future generations. Preserved in silver and gold. The discovery of the silver bars was another mind-boggling moment for Paul. He knew his grandparents had lived through the Great Depression, a time when many people turned to gold and silver to protect their wealth. But he hadn't realized just how seriously they took it. The silver bars, carefully marked and stored, were a testament to their foresight. While others were losing their savings, his grandparents had been quietly collecting precious metals, ensuring they would have something tangible in case the world collapsed again. The silver bars weren't just valuable for their metal content, they were symbols of survival. The markings on each bar revealed their origin and purity, giving each one its own unique story. Some bars had been acquired directly from minting companies, others from private dealers, and a few even had family connections tied to their purchase. As Paul handled each bar, he could almost imagine his grandparents, in the middle of the Great Depression, carefully weighing their options, making decisions that would safeguard their future. These silver bars, gleaming under the dim light of the farmhouse, were more than just investments. They represented a mindset, a survival instinct that Paul had only recently come to understand. His grandparents had seen the value in precious metals when others had not, and their foresight had preserved a small fortune. As Paul carefully placed the silver bars into protective cases, he felt a sense of awe. These objects were no longer just pieces of his family's past. They were a symbol of their resilience, their foresight, and their ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world. The silver bars were not just a financial investment. They were a legacy that would now be passed down to him. An unexpected connection to the past. While the coins and currency were certainly the highlight of the find, it was the discovery of his grandfather's firearms collection that truly took Paul's breath away. Each gun, each firearm, was a piece of American history, from the Civil War to World War II and beyond. The collection was vast, carefully curated, and each gun told a story of the men who had carried them and the events they had witnessed. The first gun Paul came across was a Civil War-era Colt revolver, its barrel worn and its frame etched with the marks of time. The revolver had been used by soldiers returning from the war, a weapon that had seen the bloodshed and struggles of the American Civil War. Paul marveled at the craftsmanship of the revolver and wondered about its previous owner. Was it a soldier who had fought for the Union or the Confederacy? What stories had this weapon been a part of? Next, Paul found an 1873 Peacemaker revolver, the same type carried by lawmen in the American West. The Peacemaker was a symbol of justice in a rapidly changing frontier. He could almost hear the sounds of the Old West, the galloping horses, the quick draw of the gun, the lawman facing down the outlaw in a dusty street. The Peacemaker had been passed down through generations, its story etched into the very fabric of American history. As Paul continued to sort through the collection, he discovered a 1911 service pistol, used during World War I, and a police revolver from 1927, still bearing its original badge number. Each firearm had been meticulously preserved, wrapped in protective cloth, and stored safely away from harm. But it wasn't just the guns themselves that fascinated Paul. It was the history behind them. Each piece had been carefully documented, its origins traced, and its story recorded. His grandfather had not simply collected guns. He had preserved history, telling the story of America's past through the firearms that had shaped it. The discovery of these firearms only deepened Paul's connection to his grandfather. This wasn't just a collection of old guns. It was a testament to the history of his country, a physical record of the struggles, triumphs, and tragedies that had shaped America. The story of Joseph W. Barr. Among the most unexpected discoveries was a stack of bar notes bearing the signature of Joseph W. Barr, a name that wouldn't have meant much to most people. But to Paul, these bills represented something extraordinary. As he researched further, Paul learned that Joseph W. Barr had served as Secretary of the Treasury for a brief period in 1968. During his short tenure, the U.S. Treasury printed a limited amount of currency bearing his signature, a rare occurrence in the history of American currency. These bar notes had been carefully preserved by his grandfather, who had recognized their significance long before Paul ever laid eyes on them. As Paul examined the notes, he realized they were part of a unique moment in American financial history. The value of these bills varied depending on their condition, but the historical value was immeasurable. Paul couldn't believe that his grandfather had kept such a collection, recognizing its importance and carefully safeguarding it for future generations. As Paul continued to examine the bills, he learned that finding even one of these bar notes today was a rare event. But to find a collection of them, in such pristine condition, was a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Paul had unwittingly uncovered a small but significant part of American history, one that had been carefully hidden beneath the floorboards of his grandparents' farmhouse for decades. A treasure trove preserved for future generations. As the days passed, Paul began to fully comprehend the monumental scale of what his grandparents had preserved for so many years. These weren't just relics from the past. They were a carefully curated archive of history, hidden away for decades. Each item, whether a tarnished coin or a faded bill, told a different story about the era in which it had been created. His grandparents' collection, once a secret, had now become a window into a bygone era, and Paul felt an overwhelming responsibility to protect and preserve it for the future. The more he explored the collection, the more Paul realized that his grandparents had never merely been hoarders. They were keepers of stories, of moments frozen in time. Some of the coins were older than the United States itself, and the silver bars had survived the economic collapse of the 1930s. Each piece was a reminder of resilience in the face of adversity, a testimony to the foresight and careful planning that had gone into preserving such a diverse and invaluable assortment. Paul began to imagine how many other families had similar treasures lying hidden in forgotten attics, basements, or behind walls that no one had thought to look behind. How many people were unknowingly sitting on pieces of history, oblivious to the stories they could tell? Paul's discovery had become a turning point in his understanding of not just his grandparents, but also the greater legacy of families who had lived through and witnessed some of the most significant moments in history. As he sifted through the items, Paul realized his grandparents had been intentional about preserving these things, not just as investments, but as a personal history that would live on beyond them. Each artifact he uncovered was another piece of their world, one that Paul had once been too young to understand. The deeper he went, the more he realized that his family's history was intricately tied to the broader narrative of America's past, a story of survival, perseverance, and the preservation of culture that could easily have been lost. Preserving the past, as Paul sat in the farmhouse, surrounded by boxes filled with his grandparents' treasures, he faced a decision that would change everything. The thought of selling the items, turning them into something valuable for his immediate needs, was tempting, especially with the looming costs of repairing the house. But after hours of reflection, Paul realized something profound. These items were not just his inheritance, but part of a shared history, a piece of the American story. They belonged in the public eye, preserved for generations to come. The decision wasn't made lightly. The farmhouse had already drained so much of his energy and finances, and the realization of just how costly the restoration would be hit him hard. New roofs, plumbing, wiring, it all added up to a staggering amount. But as Paul began cataloging the collection, he was struck by the knowledge that what he had in his hands was far more significant than a few pieces of metal or paper. His grandparents had preserved for so many years. These weren't just relics from the past. They were a carefully curated archive of history, hidden away for decades. Each item, whether a tarnished coin or a faded bill, told a different story about the era in which it had been created. His grandparents' collection, once a secret, had now become a window into a bygone era, and Paul felt an overwhelming responsibility to protect and preserve it for the future. The more he explored the collection, the more Paul realized that his grandparents had never merely been hoarders. They were keepers of stories, of moments frozen in time. Some of the coins were older than the United States itself, and the silver bars had survived the economic collapse of the 1930s. Each piece was a reminder of resilience in the face of adversity, a testimony to the foresight and careful planning that had gone into preserving such a diverse and invaluable assortment. Paul began to imagine how many other families had similar treasures lying hidden in forgotten attics, basements, or behind walls that no one had thought to look behind. How many people were unknowingly sitting on pieces of history, oblivious to the stories they could tell. Paul's discovery had become a turning point in his understanding of not just his grandparents, but also the greater legacy of families who had lived through and witnessed some of the most significant moments in history. As he sifted through the items, Paul realized his grandparents had been intentional about preserving these things, not just as investments, but as a personal history that would live on beyond them. Each artifact he uncovered was another piece of their world, one that Paul had once been too young to understand. The deeper he went, the more he realized that his family's history was intricately tied to the broader narrative of America's past, a story of survival, perseverance, and the preservation of culture that could easily have been lost. Preserving the past. As Paul sat in the farmhouse, surrounded by boxes filled with his grandparents' treasures, he faced a decision that would change everything. The thought of selling the items, turning them into something valuable for his immediate needs, was tempting, especially with the looming costs of repairing the house. But after hours of reflection, Paul realized something profound. These items were not just his inheritance, but part of a shared history, a piece of the American story. They belonged in the public eye, preserved for generations to come. The decision wasn't made lightly. The farmhouse had already drained so much of his energy and finances, and the realization of just how costly the restoration would be hit him hard. New roofs, plumbing, wiring, it all added up to a staggering amount. But as Paul began cataloging the collection, he was struck by the knowledge that what he had in his hands was far more significant than a few pieces of metal or paper. His grandparents had preserved these items not for profit, but for posterity. Paul felt a deep sense of gratitude for the effort they had put into saving history, knowing that now it was his turn to carry that torch. In the end, Paul decided that the coins, the silver bars, and the bar notes would find their home in a museum, a national currency museum where they could be shared with the world. This way, their legacy would be safeguarded and displayed in a way that honored their true significance. But Paul wasn't parting with everything. The family heirlooms, those precious personal items with deep sentimental value, would stay with him, continuing to be part of his life's story. Even though it meant losing some of the collection, Paul felt a deep sense of relief. His grandparents had gone to great lengths to protect these items, and now it was his responsibility to ensure they were properly preserved. Sharing their collection with the world wasn't just about the money. It was about the values his grandparents had passed down to him, the importance of preserving what matters most, restoring the farmhouse to its glory. The days grew longer as Paul worked tirelessly to restore the farmhouse. Every broken window, every rotting beam was a reminder of the years the house had been neglected. Yet, as Paul set to work, he felt a strange sense of connection to his past. The farmhouse, once a symbol of decay and neglect, was now becoming a living, breathing testament to his family's legacy. With every hammer strike, every coat of paint, he was breathing new life into the house his father had loved. a house that had been frozen in time for far too long. Paul enlisted the help of family members and a few trusted friends, knowing he couldn't do it alone. The roof was replaced first, a daunting task that required careful planning and significant resources. The walls came next, and then the floors. Each repair was a step closer to restoring the farmhouse to its former glory. But the restoration wasn't just about fixing a house, it was about reclaiming a part of his family's history. As the farmhouse began to take shape, Paul's memories of childhood summers spent there with his grandparents resurfaced. The days he had spent listening to his grandfather's stories about treasure hunts and long-lost fortunes seemed to come alive again. And now, as he worked, Paul realized that those stories weren't just fabrications meant to entertain a child. They were reflections of the deep love his grandparents had for preserving things of value, things that mattered. By the time the restoration was complete, the farmhouse was no longer just a house. It was a monument to his family's history. Family gatherings were once again held there, and children played in the rooms where Paul had once listened to his grandfather's tales. Each corner, every room, carried a story, reminding all who entered of the sacrifices, the memories, and the love that had gone into making this house a home. What Paul found was more than just treasure. The farmhouse, now fully restored, was no longer a forgotten relic of the past. It had become a place where memories were made, where generations could come together and connect with the legacy of those who had come before them. Paul realized that in uncovering the treasures his grandparents had hidden away, he had also uncovered a piece of his own soul. These weren't just items to be cataloged or sold. They were a part of the family's story, a story that now included Paul's own discovery. As he stood in the living room, looking at the carefully displayed items, Paul understood that what he had found was far more than just treasure. These were physical representations of the values his grandparents had held dear: the preservation of history, the respect for the past, and the love of family. Each coin, each bill, each silver bar wasn't just valuable. They were reminders of the importance of holding on to the things that matter. Paul had always known that his grandparents were special, but he had never fully understood the depth of their legacy until now. The treasures they had hidden beneath the floorboards were not just worth money, they were worth preserving, for future generations to appreciate and learn from. His family's history, wrapped in the pages of a coin collection or the silver of a bar, had found its rightful place. Looking around at the restored farmhouse, Paul knew that he had made the right choice. The treasures of the past, once hidden away, had now been shared with the world. They were no longer lost to time. They were part of a larger story, one that spanned generations and connected the past, present, and future. And that was the greatest legacy his grandparents could have ever left him. As the farmhouse stands tall, restored and filled with the echoes of history, Paul's discovery is a reminder to all of us that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places we least expect. Whether it's a piece of family history or a forgotten relic, there's always something waiting to be uncovered. The past holds stories that shape who we are, and through preservation, we ensure those stories live on for generations to come. Now that Paul has uncovered his family's legacy, we're left to ponder. What treasures lie hidden in your own family's history? Could there be untold stories in your attic or basement waiting to be discovered? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you stumbled upon a hidden treasure in your own home? And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing discoveries. See you in the next video.